accepting that some of your trips might look a little bit different and they might have to be paced a little different, but you can still a lot of times do them with your particular family's needs in mind.
Hi, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and today I am joined by my lovely editor slash assistant slash helper and everything, Alyssa Nutile. And we are going to share with you travel tips when you have a medically complex or disabled child. Because obviously, like pretty much anything else in our lives, it becomes very complicated beyond just the normal complications of traveling with kids when you do have disabilities or medical complexities in the mix. So for this episode, kind of like the organization episode we did a few months ago, this came from a lot of tips and tricks that were offered by the community. And so I'm really excited to share the things that you all contributed for this, and also to have Alyssa's expertise because she has traveled with her kiddos. Alyssa, do you want to share a little bit about your experience overall in traveling with your kids and why you feel passionate about this topic?
Yes. So, like a lot of people in this community that I've heard from, we do not live anywhere near any family. My parents and my husband's parents live 4.5 and 6.5 hours away from us. And then we have a lot of extended family that we're pretty close to, but they live even farther. We have family in New Jersey, outside of New York City, and on the coast of California, and then everywhere in between. So we're not necessarily going on just random vacations. We're almost always traveling to see family. And that's a thing that we're really passionate about. So I have 2 kids. My oldest is named Harry. He's 6. And I think his first major road trip, it was 8.5 hours, and he was 3.5 months old. And we've pretty much been traveling with kids and babies since then. So my oldest is non-disabled. My daughter, Gemma, will be 4. And we've pretty much been traveling with her about that same time too. She's been on probably half a dozen flights now. She's been to dozens of states at this point. And like I said, it's almost always to see family. But if we're going to see family, a lot of times we have to go to them. And that's a thing that is really important to us. So I envision that we will keep doing that.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on a really key part of all this that I really wanted to tout and kind of remind throughout. But that travel with a medically complex or disabled child is not required, right? I feel it really depends on the desire level. For Alyssa, for you, where that's really important to you to be connected to family and go see them and visit them. And, it sounds like in order to do that, you need to go to them. And so that's something that feels like a priority to you. And a lot of other people who contributed, responses feel the same way, as well as oh, I want to go to Disney World, or these different, maybe more destination vacations. But I think a really key part of this is just assessing how much do I want this? Is this a priority to me? Is this really important to me? And what am I willing to do to make it work? Because from reading different responses from lots of different parents, I don't know, I kind of feel if you really, really want to, you can. I think that's a really empowering thing. And again, if you don't really, really want to, you don't have to be I'm a good parent. And, I don't want any kind of guilt, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And honestly, I was talking to my husband and I was so Kimball does not have all these devices anymore. And so I'm not super in that boat of oh, should I travel even with all the extra work that goes into that? But honestly, if I were in that boat, I don't know that we would travel. I'd probably be in the boat where we're fine at home. I don't have this huge desire to go places. So anyway, I just want to put both parts of that and let that be our theme or our guide throughout the episode.
Yeah. So my daughter Gemma is totally non-mobile. She doesn't have oxygen or anything, breathing devices, but she is fully G-tube fed. She can't sit up by herself. She can't move herself around. She has a lot of the things. A caveat right from the beginning, I'm not going to say that it's never stress-free. It always stresses me out a little bit before we go. And we've had a lot of practice, and I still I have a checklist we go through, and I am running through all the scenarios okay, we need to plan for this, and we need to plan for this, and we need to think about this step of that. So I would never say that it's just as easy as taking any other family vacation or kids or whatever. It's not. But to your point, it's really important to us. And so I'm kind of just well, we're doing it. We're going to get there somehow. We're going to like take our time and we'll roll with the punches, and it is what it is. But it's not like a jaunt in the woods every day. I do want to say that first. Like you said, it's important to us, but it isn't easy all the time.
Right. And I think like this episode, like as like going through like all the things to keep in mind and like all the prep work that needs to happen, like it is clear that it takes a lot of extra effort and time, like you say, and more worry and stuff than the typical family. And I think that can bring up a lot of like tough emotions too, like whether you are the type that are like, yes, I'm going to do this and this is important to me. And it takes all this extra work, or you're like, that takes so much work and I'm so afraid of it and stuff that that's something that we can't do as a family. Like on either side of that, I think those can bring up some really tough feelings. And that's where I want to jump in is the emotions of it. And that's why I asked each of you in the community on Instagram stories. If you don't follow me already, you can follow at the_rare_life. That's where I get a lot of these answers for these types of episodes. But anyway, the first one I wanted to touch on is grief, because I think that is something that, like, you know, if you define grief, it's like being sad about something that you expected in your life and like a loss of something. And so I think the ease of travel, and not that like traveling with kids is ever easy, right? Because there's all the things you have to bring for kids. But then when you throw in the medical complexities and disabilities, like it really does get really complicated. And so I think that it's good to acknowledge that and name it if you're feeling really sad or frustrated or any of those emotions, that like a lot of that probably is grief, that you're grieving that what you expected your life to be like in that regard. So one parent, Victoria, she said, I find it hard to see other families travel to other countries or exotic locations or really anywhere by plane because it's not feasible for our family. I feel like I just have to let go of that expectation. I'll never be able to take a fun vacation or fly anywhere. I realize it's a preference thing because other families with disabled kids make it work, but it's just not worth the effort to us. And I think that's very valid, right? Like, and I actually asked her more when she said, like, we just can't do it. And I was like, oh, can you tell me more about that? And so I think that's when she was really like, I mean, I guess just for us, like, that's our decision, which kind of goes back to the theme of like, if you really, really want to do it, you can. But like, there are so many obstacles to it. Like, it's very understandable to kind of write that off as like, we're just not going to do that. And then she added to this really cool tip. She said, we'll stay an extra day on our trip to medical appointments and do something fun then. So I think that's really cool. I think that could be a really awesome in-between, especially if you're like not ready yet. And you're like, hey, someday I do want to go on like an official trip with my family. And, you know, maybe that's a few years down the road once I become more comfortable. But in the meantime, we'll elongate those medical appointment trips a day. And honestly, I really like those kind of vacations myself. They're just super simple. And I feel like kids really like those. I feel like as parents, we're like, we need to go to Disneyland, but like it'd be super happy, like a staycation at a hotel with a pool. Like at least, you know, I think a lot of kids are that way. So, and then I think this recording from a parent has some really great points too, as far as how this can feel for us as parents.
Hi, this is Carrie Harbath, mom to Sloan. I just wanted to share that when Sloan was first born, my husband and I actually went to dinner the day before bringing her home from the NICU because we were told in a care conference that our life was about to change in really hard ways and that we would never have opportunities to travel or have adventures ever again. And at the time, it felt so real to us that we went to dinner at a local brewery and said, well, this is it. That's our last adventure for a long time, which couldn't be further from the truth. And while it felt really daunting and really impossible at one point, and we were told explicitly in care conferences that travel may never be something that we could do, that we've proven them wrong over and over again, which has been really exciting and rewarding, not just to us, but probably those same doctors in the care conferences and our medical team. And so now today, it's actually just me and Sloan. My husband passed away about 3 years ago. And since then, as a solo mom to a medically complex kid with disabilities, we have traveled many times and we adapt. We stay patient, even when it's really tricky, and we do it. And it is by far some of the most rewarding, memorable experiences that we've had to date. And I always joke that Sloan knows when she's going on vacation because she gets big vacay vibes and she just loves it more than anything. So just remember, what feels impossible might be possible, and to hold hope because it's going to be worth it.
I love that. I love that so much. I feel like that encapsulates a lot of how we feel just as medically complex parents. I remember when we first brought Gemma home from the hospital, and even we knew bits and pieces of her diagnosis when I was still pregnant, and people were like, oh, your life is going to be different. Oh, it's so hard to do all these things with like a child with a disability. Oh, everything is like, all this stuff. And it is different. It's different even when you travel and all of that, but it can be done. Like Carrie said, it's not easy, but it can be done. If you really want to do it, you can find ways to do it. The world is not super accessible still, but getting more accessible for our kids, right? And I think the more we do it, the easier it gets also.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love it so much. And then another one that came up a lot is like past traumatic experiences in traveling, then a lot of real fear around that. And so, like one mom said, I hate the idea of travel. It's super inconvenient with all the equipment, plus the absolute trauma of having a rare kiddo desat and become unresponsive on our air flight, knowing no one could help. So the feelings are mostly trauma responses and fear. That's very valid. Like, yeah, I probably would never fly again either. That's a scary thing. And we do have tons of tips for specifically flying. So if that's also your fear, but you feel like you want to try that someday, then we got you. We got some tips for that. And then related, there is also like a lot of fear and panic and anxiousness. Like there's several people who just said, I just feel panic when I think about traveling. And I think a lot of that comes from like thoughts of like worst case scenarios, like, oh my gosh, what if fill in the blank? Because a lot of us have lived through worst case scenarios. Like the thing does happen, the emergency does occur, and, a lot of traumatic experiences with those type of things. And then, along with that, what will we do in a medical emergency? So a lot of like hospital planning of like, where's the nearest hospital? Can we life flight back to our main hospital if we need to? How long would that take? Equipment planning and things like that. And then along with the equipment, like, will we remember everything? Will it function well? Will it get damaged? Will it be accessible? And then how will we fill in the blank? A lot of questions with that, like how will we do diaper changes or access places when we have a wheelchair or calm down our overstimulated child. So just a lot of like fears around that and stresses, which totally makes sense again. And then it's also like just the sheer work of it, like beyond like the emotional like fear and things like that, of it does take a ton of extra work. And so one parent said, I just really question whether it's worth it. Is it worth it to ruin the very fragile routine that we have and send my son spiraling to drive for hours and not sleep in our beds for some moderate memories? Could we do this at home? 99% of the time, I would say no, except for the fact that I have another kid who doesn't have complex medical needs, and that makes me say yes. So that is really valid. That's like such a true thing, like especially when they are very attached to the routine, and you do have a very fragile routine and any little thing can throw it off. So a big trip, I mean, yeah, that can like really disrupt that.
I do want to add here too, kind of on that note, the like cost benefit. It's a privilege to be able to travel at all, right? Because like it is expensive. And I will say that like when we travel, I usually spend extra money. Like I buy extra food that I know is going to be easy to travel with. And that's not feasible for everybody too, right? Like it's not even just like, oh, I want to, where it feels overwhelming, but like there is cost prohibitive stuff when you have kids like ours too. And we should acknowledge that also.
Definitely. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. And even like, because traveling just with, non-disabled kids is really expensive anyway. And then adding in, I mean, a lot of the tips and stuff includes purchasing specific stuff that will make it easier. And so that is an added cost on top of that. And then you throw in a lot of medical bills and things like that. And it really is not feasible for a lot of families. That's true. I'm really glad you brought that up. And then there is like the last part I just wanted to like hit on is just like the desire that parents also do feel. And obviously that's why we're even making this episode. If there wasn't that desire, it'd just be like, yeah, it sucks. It's not worth it. Don't travel by, like that'd be the end of it. But there is that desire that we touched on before, and kind of like this conflict of emotions. So like one mom said she feels stressed, but I don't want my child to be left out of experiences. Another one said anxious, but desperate to do it, but anxious, so anxious. And then Another mom said, attempting to travel has been a priority for us, so I have a lot of opinions on this. We took my daughter to a friend's wedding in Fairbanks, Alaska in December when she was maybe 3. Trach and G-tube and oxygen and all. She even went dog sledding with us. So that's like another case for like, it was really important to her. So they were able to make that happen. And then I just want to like also, so this is reminding me a lot of an episode we did, I think it was like 2 years ago, with a mom named Felicia. And so like people who've been around longer might remember this episode, but she talked about her daughter Callie with all of her medical devices and things like that and how they do travel a lot. And I will link that episode in the show notes for you to go back and listen to that if you want. But in that episode, one specific part I do want to like really bring forward is she talked about how they took baby steps. And so they started with like driving to the lake an hour away. And they're like, wow, we actually survived that. Like that was amazing. We could do it. We brought all this stuff. And then they drove a little bit further to their next little thing. And then once they got comfortable with that, they tried a really short plane ride. And then they even tried a longer plane ride. And so I think with all of these pieces of advice, like if this is something you want to do, I do think that having the baby steps can make it feel a lot less scary, a lot more doable. Okay, so let's jump in to the bulk of the episode. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of a roadmap, we divided this episode out into sections. So we're first going to cover just a few general and like miscellaneous tips that kind of apply to any kind of travel. And then we will get into airline travel specifically, which we had a lot of tips from parents on that one. And then we will get into car travel, like if you're going on a road trip, hotel/lodging, theme parks, so theme park specific tips, and then camping in case that's something you want to tackle. So let's start out with that miscellaneous and general advice. One is to not forget Mijo, which is, if you listen to our organization hack episode, you know that they are an app for parents to log all their children's information about their medical history and background and all their medical needs and their team of specialists. And so this can be really great when you're on a trip. And like if you do happen to have an emergency that arises, that you can have that all on hand and they can at a glance know all the medical history and what they need to know about your child. And then with packing, so one mom said that she always packs 1.5 times what she thinks she'll need for diapers, formula, and supplies. And then she packs 3 times what you think you would need for medical supplies, like spare G-tubes or rescue meds. And then she also said that she makes sure that at least 2 people check the list and ensure everything is packed. So that also implies writing out every single thing you think you'll need on the trip so you can go through and check each one off, because it is a really big deal if you forget something. It's not like, oh, I forgot diapers, I can just run to the store and grab those. Like, it's a big deal if it's something medical related. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, going back to the organization hacks episode that came out a few weeks ago, Megan Schneider said that she made a laminated list, like packing list, for every time they travel somewhere. And I think that's a really good idea. Even if you don't travel all the time, make the list ahead of time so that you can make the list and then you can double check the list and then you can pack everything and double check the list again. Having that out of your brain ahead of time and like on paper is just like one less thing you have to worry about when you're actually going through the logistics of packing and everything. The other thing is that how you're going to travel is going to inform the way that you pack a little bit, right? Because we have a big town and country van with like snow and go and like the seats fold down. And it's just me and my husband and my 2 kids, right? So like when we're doing road trips, we just pack everything. We're like, we can't have too much stuff because we have room in our van. And like, what if we need it or what if we don't? Like, we just don't have to worry about it. We pack whatever like we can think of. When we fly, it's a little bit different. So like we'll pack a lot in our checked bag, but there's also stuff that you need to carry with you like through the airport, right? So the one thing about that with your carry-ons is like you don't get to make multiple trips on and off planes. What you get to take on the plane is whatever you can carry with you in one trip. And a lot of times that also includes carrying our child, right? If they're non-mobile or if they have a stroller or something like that. So thinking really strategically about like, especially if you have a layover, like if you get stuck in the airport longer than you expect, like what do I have to have on hand and what can I leave in my checked luggage for those like few hours in between. And I'm sure that's going to be different for a lot of us, but thinking about like those sort of pieces of travel too can help make it a little bit easier too. So you're just not carrying giant bags of things around all the time, because that's stressful too, right? Like figuring out even just how you're going to get all the things through any specific place.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. And I will say too that like the person who gave this piece of advice is talking about RV camping. So like that's probably a very similar thing to like the whole like we throw things in our car and we're driving somewhere so we can pack as much as we want if you have that space. But yeah, when you're flying, like you do have to be a lot more strategic. And we'll get into like more flying tips too. But like with all these things, like just remember that it obviously sounds really overwhelming, but like this is helping you do the work ahead of time so that when you go on the trip, it's that much more easy and peaceful and less chaotic than it might be otherwise if you're not thinking of all the things first.
And I want to make one more just general note about planning. So when you're traveling with a medically complex kid, it can be really overwhelming to think of like all the things you need, all the like stuff that you're going to have to do at any given place. And my advice for that would be break it down into like the sections of your trip, right? So like the traveling portion and then the staying portion. What are we going to need there? And then like coming home. And also remember that like usually you have a little less stuff coming home because you've used like a lot of your supplies while you're there, right? So the coming home is usually like a little bit easier. But break it down into chunks and think about especially like the bottlenecks that you might run into at any given place. Like what are you going to want available in the car while you're traveling, or what are you going to want available like on the plane? Thinking about it that way can make it a lot easier to one, like pare down what you need and what you don't need, and just make it more manageable when you're trying to collect all the stuff in the first place.
Yeah, I really like that. That sounds super awesome. And maybe like, and we kind of have this episode divided out like that. And so you could be jotting down notes too as we share this. And then mobility. So specifically, I asked for carrying packs, like kind of like baby carriers, but for older kids or bigger kids. And I got so many responses. I'm just going to share like the top 3 that we heard about. And then we will link in the show notes a list of like all the packs that people recommended so that if you really want to buy like the best possible pack, you can do a lot of research and check out all the different things. Definitely one of the most popular ones that we were told is called a Kinder pack. And it comes in a lot of different sizes. And they recently just added another size. So now it carries up to 85 pounds, which a lot of our kids, I think, would probably fit in that category. Because I know that like even as they get older, a lot of our kids are a little underweight, like the typical kids that same age. So that's super cool. I love that. I'm not even sure if they were heavier than that, you would even really want to carry that. But this one mom said about the Kinder pack, she said, it works really well. My 10-year-old that is somewhere in the 60-pound range can fit in comfortably, and my very tall husband wore it comfortably. So I think these can be great as like an alternative to a wheelchair if you don't want to like take that wherever you're going, or if you're going on a hike or maybe even in a theme park, or I don't know. Like I feel like this can be applicable, I don't know, going through the airport, a lot of different places that you might be traveling. And another one is called We Carry Kevin. I had never heard of this one, but quite a few people recommended it. And it is a hiking backpack and is for up to 80 pounds. And they also offer a neck pillow for those who need that extra support. And I looked at this one and it looks really nice. I think that's one I would want personally. But
we have one of these for Gemma and it is really nice. It is a little bit bulky, but like I said, Gemma's non-mobile. She's also like really hypotonic in her trunk, so she can't really hold herself up. So this particular backpack is really supportive. It has a neck pillow, so she gets head support. It's really supportive through her trunk, so she's upright, so she can see everything, like where we're going and what we're doing. The other thing is that this company offers grants and will get you a backpack for free when they have grants available. You have to apply for it. It's not like a really quick thing. I think what they do is they get applications and then they get grant funding like based on the needs of the people that apply. But if this is a thing that interests you, I would say go to their website, fill out a grant form, because they are really expensive if you were just going to like buy one. But they do have a lot of like financial aid options. So that's another thing I really liked about this particular backpack.
that is awesome. I love that. And there's also another product too that is like kind of reminds me a little bit of that, but the Wonderfold wagon. I know a lot of parents use that for their disabled children. And so it is like, just like a little wagon that you pull, but they do come with like harnesses and things like that if they don't have as much muscle tone. And they do have a program where if you have a child with disabilities, you can like fill out the form and have a doctor sign it and stuff. And then you get 25% off. And so I think that's cool that they have that available. I'm not sure like if they have some kind of connection to the disability world. I don't know. I thought that was really cool that they have that available. So we'll also put links for all these things. Oh, and really quick too, we do have a YouTube video for this episode. So it's just like we take the audio and then we're also putting up pictures of each thing. So if you're wondering what each of these ones look like, there'll be a little picture that goes on the screen and you can see it. We also have it for like other tips that parents will share as far as like even just like setup, like how they do things for their kids, and we'll have pictures from them so you can kind of visualize it. So go there if you want to see those. And there will be an article as well as the YouTube videos. And we can't include everything, but we'll have kind of our top tips in there with links to the products. So you can check out the link in the show notes for that. Which, by the way, I've been wanting to clarify this. So when we say show notes, that's like the episode description. When you go there, that is what we mean by show notes. Like I realize that like not everyone knows that, like what are even the show notes? But if you are listening on some kind of podcast player, really any podcast player, that will have the episode description, and in there is what we're talking about when we say the show notes. There are links in there and you can click those to get these different resources. And then just one other carrier I just wanted to mention too is called the Tush Baby Hip Carrier. And this is actually pretty cool. It's like an oversized like fanny pack, and it like creates like this little seat that you can kind of plop your kid on when you're carrying them. So it's just basically like support if you just are carrying your child, like a traditional like holding them. And it just gives you a little extra support. And this parent was talking about it in regards to their child with hypotonia, because if they're extra floppy, it's a little harder to carry them. And so that can also be like an extra, I don't know, that would be helpful in like theme parks or places like that. Okay, one last thing, and we'll move on to airline. There's this really cool thing. It's called Not a Wheelchair, but it basically is. It's this really great company. So the founders it's a husband and wife duo, and she is disabled, and they wanted to like be able to go outdoors and go hiking and go camping and stuff, but that's really hard with a wheelchair. And so they created this product called Not a Wheelchair. It's a power wheelchair, but they can't call it a wheelchair because it doesn't have the official like approval by like the board and stuff. But because of that, they're able to offer it for a lot cheaper because it's not technically a wheelchair. You should check that out too, because it's like off-roading electric wheelchair, and they just came out with a kids version. So I think that's cool. So if you guys want to go somewhere kind of adventurous and outdoorsy, like you can use that too. Okay. Are you ready for the airline section? This one's big. This is like an intense one because I think this is probably the most complicated part of like traveling with medically complex kids. And as I was thinking about it too, I think that like one of the scariest parts of going on a plane is like, obviously like there's a lot of hassle involved, but like the idea of being in the air for hours without access to medical care, I think can feel really scary to families. And anyway, that's just one thing I was thinking about. I think that can feel not very settling. So, okay, I want to play a little audio submission from one of our listeners about this.
Hey, this is Carrie Harbath. I'm back again to talk about airline travel. So we've only done airline travel together once, to Florida and back to theme parks, which I'll share in a moment. But I was so nervous. So Sloan specifically is profoundly deafblind, cannot see or hear, and there's no usable vision or hearing whatsoever. As we all probably know, deafblindness is a spectrum. Sloan is on the profound end, so can't see or hear. And then on top of that has some medical complexities, including a tracheostomy. And so that was the thing that really made me nervous flying. And then there's some equipment and things that go along with, traveling with a trach. And so while we made it through without having to use really too many resources, luckily I had my sister with me and she was able to help. We took our time. We were just prepared in many ways. We were prepared for the worst. We were prepared for all things to happen. And honestly, it again was one of those things that felt so daunting, so impossible, and we made it, and it really was a wonderful experience. But one of the things I had done to prep for in advance that we ended up actually not using because it was easier than we thought is TSA Cares. So you can apply to use this program online. I think you have to apply at least a week in advance. I may be wrong on that, so worth double checking. I know from other experiences that it can be hit and miss sometimes. So that's worth noting. But beyond that, TSA Cares can help you with whatever you need to get to your flight. They basically send a TSA agent with you from the start of getting like check in to your flight, to getting on the plane. And so you can get assistance and help that way. And it's a nice benefit when you're getting ready to fly.
Awesome. And Alyssa, you have used TSA Cares. So
I actually haven't used TSA Cares, but I have heard about it. And I think that's a good idea for people to look into for sure.
yeah, and I love that they like prepared for the worst because it's kind of, again, that's where your mind goes. And so feeling like you've done everything you can to prepare for it. If something does go wrong while you're flying, I think that can be like really helpful, like for peace of mind. And then in case something really does happen.
Totally. One thing that I got, our family, you don't have to do this for children. You only have to do this for the adults traveling with you. But we got TSA PreCheck. It's like an $85 fee. It lasts for several years, and it lets you go through the PreCheck line instead of like the regular security line. So one, the line is shorter, which can be a lot easier when you are just traveling with children of any kind. Like them not having to stand in line for an hour makes the whole thing like so much simpler. But it also, like, you don't have to take your laptop out of your bag. If you travel with a computer, you don't have to take your shoes off. It makes the process just a lot simpler. My daughter travels with like medication, and she's on a very strict keto diet. So we have to bring like 24 hours worth of formula with us everywhere we go. I also have like a totally fully metal hip replacement. So I can't go through like a metal detector. So it makes that part easier too. We just have like a lot fewer things that we have to do at TSA. And again, that's, I know, sort of like a privilege thing because it is an extra cost. But if flying is a thing that you're doing regularly, I would definitely consider it.
That's awesome. And do these apply to other countries? That's probably a dumb question, but TSA is specifically for USA, right?
Yes. So there is a different program. I forget exactly what it's called. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's like global PreCheck or something like that. You do it through TSA, but it works internationally. And I should know, I've actually never really traveled internationally at all with Gemma or just with myself. So I don't know as much about that, but I know that that's something you can get too.
Okay. Because just for like listeners who are not in the United States, you might need to look at your own specific local versions of these things. And then another parent has also, she talked about using the TSA Cares. And she said that she had a dedicated TSA agent and with experience with medical stuff who made sure that their items got screened carefully and without extra fuss/confusion. So, I mean, honestly, I think that's probably a really great resource to use, especially if it's your first time. And then maybe in the future, you could be like, I don't need this every time or whatever. But yeah. And then here's some controversial advice about security. She said, add 20 minutes of time per piece of equipment to get through security, which I think like for parents listening who have like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces of medical equipment, like that might be like, well, that's not worth it. I don't want to stand in security for like 2 hours. So do you have insight on that?
Yes. So that hasn't been our experience. The last couple times we've flown, we've done PreCheck, but when she was little, we didn't have PreCheck, so we went through the regular security line. And I would say probably 20 or 30 minutes total, maybe, to your security line time, because they're going to look through all of your equipment and all of your medicine and all of your food and stuff all at the same time. So they'll pull aside all of our stuff. They'll go through all of our equipment. I've had to do like a pat down before, again, because of my hip and because we have so much stuff, and like they'll do that right there with you. And they try and keep everything together because it's easier for them too if they can get you through faster. So I would say definitely add time. I don't think you probably need to add like hours of time.
That makes sense. And then one little tip too that this parent had is to have your tube fed child connected to their feeding pump, because they can just walk right through the thing and they don't have to like use that as like one of the items they're checking. So like there's like a little time saver with that.
You can also ask, even if you don't have like a wheelchair, because we don't take Gemma's wheelchair on the plane because I don't know if you've heard, but like airlines are often kind of notorious for like having issues with damage to wheelchairs. So like we don't even risk it. She's small enough, she can still fit in a stroller. So we just take her in a stroller through the airport. But she's non-mobile. And when we get to TSA, I tell them that. I'm like, she's non-mobile and I'm not going to take her out of the stroller. So like whatever you have to do to test the stroller with her in it, do that. And that can speed up the process a little bit too, when you don't have to like unhook your child and pull them out and have them do all of that stuff. They can check around your child as long as you just ask them.
That's a good point. I think that's also just a good rule of thumb for other things too, as they come up, is just to like, I think like generally people are kind and they can understand if you just explain like, hey, this is a situation. So that's great that they were like conducive to that. And yeah, like airlines are notorious for damaging wheelchairs. So that's like a part of this too.
I do always err on the side of over explaining. Sometimes you'll get up to the gate and the TSA agent will just look at you and they'll be like, tell the next guy, because I don't deal with that hair. But you know, like just tell them everything that you need to like tell them. And usually that works out. Like I haven't had a lot of pushback. I've had people give me like funny looks. And then I'm like, look at my child though. She's like clearly disabled. I haven't been given like too much of a hassle to try to go through that sort of part. Yeah, to your point, like just keep saying all the things. You have all the paperwork, you have all the stuff, you clearly have a disabled child. Explain as much as you can. You can't over explain.
There you go. That's a good tip.
Okay, so another part of flying with your medical children, to some degree, this also applies for like any child. For example, if you go on a plane, you get to take a car seat free of charge. It does not count as a checked bag. Any airline has to transport a car seat for you. Some of them can even go on the plane. You'll have to check if your car seat is approved as like FFA approved or not, because they're like a slightly different size. But you could feasibly even take that onto the actual plane and put it in a seat for children who are really hypotonic if you can carry it with all the other things that you have. But they have to transport car seats for you. They have to transport wheelchairs for you. Any other bulky equipment, like if you had to take a vent or something like that, a walker, like all sorts of things like that. If it's a medical device, the airline does have to transport it for you. The caveat to this is that you can't pack other stuff in with those medical devices. So like you can't pack like a vent and then I don't know, like a bunch of clothes around it or something like that, because now it's luggage. So you have to pack them separately. And again, with the over explaining, tell them what it is, especially at the ticket counter. There's two different types of checking when you're flying with an airplane. There's the checked bags that you do at the ticket counter, like right when you get into the airport. You know, those are usually your bigger bags. They go underneath the plane and then you don't get access to them again until you land wherever your destination is. The other kind is a gate check. And so this is stuff that you're going to carry with you through the airport. A lot of times it'll be like strollers or wheelchairs if you're brave enough to take the wheelchair, or maybe like a wagon, possibly a walker. Again, that sort of thing that like you or your child will need to get from the ticket counter to the actual gate to get onto the plane. Those other devices you will check all the way over there at the plane, because you don't want them to go under the plane. And especially if you have a layover, you're going to want them in between your flights too, so you can get around the airport there as well. But again, any of those devices, they have to be packed like just by themselves. They can't go in with any other luggage if you want it to count as a medical device.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you think of this, but this one parent said, on our last trip, we brought my daughter's wheelchair, walker, W4 Wonderfold wagon, and canes all the way up to the gate. We flew 2 different airlines, and I had received confirmation that we could bring all 4 mobility devices and gate check them at no cost. We received a lot of pushback at the gate, but I had asked for a confirmation email and showed that to the gate agents. I assume she like printed it out or had it on her phone. The more documentation, the better. I also had them include on the confirmation the size and weight of the pieces so I could confirm that I did indeed tell them well in advance. The wagon is particularly large and heavy, so I wanted to be as transparent as possible about that, but also firm after it was approved.
So I have 2 thoughts about that. The first one is she said the more documentation, the better. And absolutely, always, 100%, you can't have too much documentation. My experience is you don't usually have to pull it out at the airline or at the airport, but like having it with you is a huge weight off your shoulders in case you need it for something, right? Like in this case. The other thought that I have is that the airlines, they do tend to be pickier about what you gate check versus what you check at the ticket counter and goes underneath the airplane ahead of time. So I don't know this particular situation. Her daughter, maybe she needs all 4 of those mobility devices to get around at the airport. And if she does, they had to be gate checked, and like that's all there is to it. I sort of understand why the airlines are like a little hesitant, because gate checking is a thing that like can slow down the scheduling of the planes, because they have to do it like as people are loading, and they put it in like a slightly different area than the rest of the luggage, so that, you know, if there's like a ton of it, that might delay the plane a little bit. So if it's like really an issue and, you know, you think your child could get away with like maybe having 1 or 2 mobility devices, you could try maybe checking a couple of them at the ticket counter and then taking a couple different ones up to the gate. But if that's not feasible, like it sort of sounded like was the case with this family, just make sure everything is documented, make sure you have notes, and then you're kind of sort of in that position of like being an advocate for your child again, just like we do with medical stuff. It's like, well, they have to have it. So, you know, you have to let us on the plane and they have to have these things. So like, what do we have to do to figure this out?
Yeah, totally. Well, I like how she phrased that. She said, I wanted to be as transparent as possible about that, but also firm after it was approved. So I kind of like that. She did the due diligence and got it all approved and stuff, and then was like, I'm not going to be mean about it, but like, I'm going to stand my ground on this.
Totally.
And then there was also a parent that said that you need to bring a doctor's note with the medications that you're bringing. Do you know if that's true?
I've never had to show documentation for Gemma. Part of it could be too that like she looks very visibly disabled. So like I haven't really had a lot of pushback with TSA for that. Again, I would say have it in case you need it. So like everywhere we go in Gemma's backpack, I have like a whole big folder with a ton of her medical documentation, just because we could feasibly run into some type of emergency anywhere, right? And I would imagine that a lot of us carry around a lot of medical documentation. So I've actually never gotten specific travel notes from any doctors to like go on any particular trips, but I've always thought if TSA asks me, I'm gonna just pull out my giant folder and be like, here you go, here is all of her list of medications, here are all of her things. Like, are you really gonna give me trouble now?
They'll be like, okay.
Right, exactly.
They'll be like, I don't want to look through all that. Yeah,
totally. It doesn't hurt. Totally get the note, especially if that's going to give you some peace of mind. But I haven't actually had to pull it out on any of the flights that we've gone on.
That's good to know, because I was like, that seems like over the top. Like, do they really need that? But that person must have been stopped before or heard about that or something. Okay, now we're going to get into the oxygen section, I guess, of flying. So if your child needs oxygen, this can be trickier. And I got a lot of advice on this. One parent explained that helped, kind of understand why it is kind of a process to bring oxygen, is because an oxygen concentrator on the plane can mess with the pilot's instruments. So they need to know about that beforehand. So I thought that was a really good, that makes more sense of why this is kind of an intense process, but as parents have shared, it is also very doable. So don't get too overwhelmed by the technicalities here. And then also a note that even if your child is not always on oxygen, they may need to do that while they're on the plane, just because the oxygen is lower while you're in the air. This one mom said, we were temporarily given a portable oxygen concentrator with a ton of backup batteries. Our son isn't on oxygen except for illness, but our pulmonologist wanted him on oxygen for the entire flight, since airplane cabins actually have a lower percentage of oxygen than typical room air. So that's something to be aware of. So I would definitely, if you think it's kind of borderline, talk to your child's doctors about that, because that would be horrible to be in the air and then realize that they need more oxygen. That sounds awful. And then to the point of what she said too about having a lot of backup batteries, that's really important, because flights can be delayed. And I also was reading that a lot of airlines require you to have 1.5 times the flight worth of power. So the backup batteries in case something happens. This one mom said, our machine died mid-flight and they had to use their emergency oxygen for my daughter. It was a nightmare. The battery malfunctioned and would only work if it was plugged in. So just it kind of goes back to when you're more prepared, it's less likely for something to go wrong, and you just have that peace of mind of having that available. And then as far as getting an oxygen concentrator, you do need to notify them, again, because of the pilots needing to know, and it needs to be on the TSA's list of approved machines. because some tanks and concentrators are not approved for use on planes. And so it sounds like you can rent them. There's this one website that rents them out called Oxygen to Go. And this parent said that she called in with questions and she was like, how does this work? And they walked her through the whole thing. So I think that's really cool. I like that. I think I would want that. And then you can also go through like your child's DME. I think you need to get a prescription from the doctor saying you need this. But I think a lot of parents go through that. A few families that travel regularly by plane said that they purchased a oxygen concentrator, which sounds like it's not cheap. Like it's in like hundreds or even thousands of dollars. So like obviously this goes back to that privilege where like that's not doable for everyone. It does sound like after you make your reservations, you do need to call the airline's accessibility desk and add the concentrator to the reservation, and it'll be like listed specifically with your child with their ticket and reservation and stuff. So they're aware of that. And they may also have a form that a doctor needs to fill out to be brought with the concentrator. So again, it's kind of like bring all your medical, like all the documentation. I think that like having the prescription you needed to get it in the first place would be a good thing to bring. And then they also mentioned that like some airlines like require you to physically check in instead of doing like the online check-in when you have an oxygen concentrator. So add some extra time and do the research, see what their policy is on that. And I would honestly just call the TSA cares or like the people who are in charge of all of that, because I think they could walk through all of it with you, like depending on like the specific airline that you're traveling with. This one parent, she said, it sounds overwhelming. I was definitely overwhelmed the first time, but everything ended up being seamless because we got all of the proper and needed services lined up. The disability services people worldwide have been the nicest and most helpful airline workers you'll ever deal with. So I think that's really cool. I love that. And then one more encouragement about using oxygen, because I don't want to turn everyone off towards using this now. So I was like sifting through all the information, like this is a lot. But it's mostly, I think it goes back to like all the prep work that we do beforehand. So then when you're actually there traveling, it's not a big deal, or at least things don't go wrong. This parent said, people actually travel with oxygen a lot. So in my experience, nobody has been weirded out. It's been shockingly easy every time we've traveled with oxygen. So there's your like, here's a big long list of logistics, but it is possible, and it doesn't even have to be like a huge headache. And then let's talk about pre-boarding, because I was reading that you get pre-boarding even before, you know, like they'll be like, parents with small children can get on first. Like you get it before that. You're nodding, Alyssa. So
yes. So almost every airline they'll do like family boarding. So like families with small children, you get to get on the plane after, it depends on the airline, but like, you know, after like the business class or first class people or that kind of stuff, which is helpful. But if you have a disabled child, this is a thing you have to do again at the ticket counter, not at the gate when you're physically getting onto the airport. You need to do it earlier. But when you get to the ticket counter, if you check in person, you can ask them to give you pre-boarding because you have a disabled child or you need more time to get onto the plane or whatever thing. You know, they have a whole list of medical conditions that allow you to get pre-boarding, and they'll put it right on your child's ticket so that when you get up to the gate, before anybody else gets on the plane, you'll have usually, the last time around, it was like 3 or 4 older people in wheelchairs and then me and Gemma and Harry, because we all have to get on at once because it was just me and my 2 small children. And they do ask you at the gate, especially like in our case, because it's definitely less common as a thing to have with small children. They're like, oh, do you have family boarding? And I'm like, no, we have free boarding. It's right here on my ticket. And they will want to see it on your ticket. But that means that you can get on the plane first, which regardless of where your seat on the plane is, it is always easier to get on the plane first, because if you're carrying a child who's non-mobile and all their stuff and all their food, not having to squeeze by people whose legs are already sticking out in the aisle makes it so much easier. And we fly Southwest a lot, so there's not assigned seats. So when we get on the plane, that means we can sit near the front, which means it's easier to get on, and then it's also easier to get off the plane because we're so close to the front too.
That is like so helpful. I think everyone should do that. And I was thinking as you're talking too, like there was probably some hardcore advocacy happening to make that like a policy, at some point to like, hey, disabled people need more time and more space to get on these planes. So yay for people who did that.
Of all the pushback I've gotten at the airport, you sometimes get snarky comments from like other passengers about that in particular, about like being able to get on the plane first. I've had people comment like, oh, wouldn't it be easier for you to get on later so you don't have to be on the plane as often with 2 small kids? And I'm like, actually, no, that's not the case. But thank you for your unnecessary opinion. Yeah.
Oh, that is annoying.
Yeah, it's weird to me that like of all the things, that's the one that like riles people up, but they can deal with it. It's difficult enough to travel with like disabled children. So like make your life easier, get pre-boarding. I should note there's no charge for that. It's just a disability service also. So like you don't have to pay money to do this pre-boarding. You just ask them for it, and you may have to provide some documentation. Again, like I haven't, but they may ask you for that, but that's all you have to do.
That's awesome. And that does seem like even more helpful too if you're going to bring on an oxygen concentrator or like other equipment like that. Hauling that through where like an already loaded plane sounds awful. But like, yeah, any case, I think pretty much anyone listening right now would definitely benefit from doing the pre-boarding. That's a great tip. Okay, let's talk about harnesses/seats. So this is an alternative to bringing a car seat because a lot of people are like, oh, we bring our car seat on the plane, but those can be hard to like transport and drag. They're usually pretty heavy. So we have 2 different harness seat things that you can use on the plane instead of a car seat for those kids who need the extra support. They can't just like sit in a seat. And so one of those is called the Kids Fly Safe Cares Harness. Again, there is a link in the show notes for all of these, so you don't need to like remember all that. And those who want a picture, again, you can go to the YouTube video to see a picture of this being used. So this one mom who loves it said, the Kids Fly Safe Cares Harness was perfect for our disabled daughter who needed extra support to sit safely in her own airplane seat. We didn't want to lug a car seat on board, and this harness easily connected to a regular airplane seat belt and wraps around the seat at the top. It weighed almost nothing, like that is huge, and packed away in its own small bag. Again, huge when you're traveling with a bunch of stuff. It's also fully approved by the FAA. So that sounds really awesome.
Yeah. So I have this just like a month ago. Harry and Gemma and I, just the 3 of us, again, me and a non-disabled 6-year-old and a profoundly disabled almost 4-year-old, got on a plane, and I had to carry Gemma. I had to carry my backpack. And then we also have her cooler and then like, the backpack for Gemma and Harry to share. And thankfully, I had my little 6-year-old with me, and he was the little pack mule who carried that stuff. But it would have been impossible to get a car seat onto the plane while carrying her and trying to do all the other stuff. So having these straps has been a huge game changer. And again, Gemma does have scoliosis. She is hypotonic. So what we do is we put the straps on. I like cinch up the waist belt pretty tight. And then we bring like small rolled up baby blankets to sort of squish in between her and the armrests. So that helps prop her up a little bit. That might not be the perfect solution if you're on a really long flight and your kid's going to get uncomfortable, but our flights were under 2 hours, all of them, and it worked pretty well for her. She was really comfortable. I don't know if this is a thing that everyone knows. If your child is over 2 years old, even if they're disabled, they have to buy their own seat and they have to sit in their own seat for takeoff and landing. So in that case, sometimes these straps can be really helpful because they have to be in their own seat, but they're actually pretty supportive. And it can just make the whole traveling thing so much easier to do that. Another reason it's nice to get the pre-boarding, though, because you got to put the straps over the back of the seat that you're on, and then you have to connect them. And it takes a couple minutes to do all of that. And it's nice to be able to do that when people aren't trying to jostle past you or the whole time. So,
yeah, especially if you need to like put down a blanket and lay down your child while you're doing that with both hands. Yeah, I think you're so brave. And you said too, like when you did do that flight, that you posted a cute picture on your stories and you got a ton of people asking, like, what is that harness? Mm-hmm. So here's the answer for everyone who thinks that would be great for them too. And then there's another one, and this one is not FFA approved, but it does sound like it's a little more supportive. And I'm going to play a piece of audio with her explaining how this works.
So we have a 7-year-old with CP, and we fly with the Firefly go-to seat. It comes now with a pressure relief pillow, which has been incredibly helpful in terms of his comfort. I should also explain that we do multiple international trips a year. We do 2 12-hour trips about a year. So it ends up being about 4 12-hour flights. And the go-to seat has been incredibly helpful in terms of his comfort. It also, like I think I said, it comes with a pressure relief pillow, which is also incredibly comfortable for him. And we recently added the inflatable footrest you can get on Amazon or AliExpress for at any price, really. And we buy the one with the hand pump, so that way it blows up with a pump and not with our mouths, and we don't gas ourselves out to exhaustion. And I just also want to recommend that with the to-go seat that you email the airline beforehand and explain to them that it's a postural support seat for a child with disabilities who will still be using the airline's seatbelt because it's not FAA approved as a safety seat like a car seat or a CARES harness. And also screenshot the email and the approval, because the last thing you want when you're getting yourself situated and settled on a plane is to have someone tell you that you can't use it. So I would recommend just getting that settled beforehand so that way you don't run into any snags.
Super cool. So for people who are watching the YouTube video, you can see this picture of her son using it, and it has a lot of support.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's perfect.
So that probably would be great.
Yeah, it's got straps. It's got like support that goes around the waist. And then it looks like she's just put the airplane seatbelt over top of it. And that should take care of your seatbelt problem for the FAA.
Honestly, it reminds me a bit of almost like an in-between of like a car seat in the kids' Fly Safe Cares harness, where it's like, I imagine that it's lighter and stuff than like an actual car seat. So that's a really great option. So take a look at that link if you are interested in that too. Well, we're done with like the mega section of this episode. We're going to move on to car travel. And it's funny because this one, I didn't get a ton of advice from this one. And I think because it's kind of straightforward, like it's sort of like similar tips that you might have if you're traveling with like kids or babies, like take frequent stops and, make sure you have lots of entertainment and things like that. I will say that like I do remember like doing road trips with Kimball when he was tube fed was like really awesome because he was a baby. And normally, like if he were just like a non-disabled baby, I'd be like, had to stop and take him out of his car seat and feed him, or, even like prep the bottle. Someone has to hold the bottle, but like we just hit start and it would feed him and it was awesome. So, I mean, like there's like a pro of tube feeding. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that because my older son who's non-disabled, we would have to do that. It'd be like, okay, he's really little. We have to stop every 2 hours. We have to feed him like 6 ounces or whatever. We have to wait. He has to burp. He has to do all this. And then when Gemma got her G-tube, she likes car rides anyway. So it's just like plop her in her seat, put her food on. We can go until one of us has to go to the bathroom, basically.
Yeah, no, just super nice. I did have to like remind myself, I probably should get him out like every once in a while. Just, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Because like he probably needs to get out of his car seat. But other than that, you don't have to like for feeding.
Right.
So one mom also said that she uses a purse hanger to hang up her child's feeding pump and just like hooks right behind her. And she even has this video of her using it, which is like super cool. So it just makes it like really easy for her to like just reach back and like push the button and like have access to it while she's driving. And that goes with the flying squirrel feeding pump hanger thing, and which we'll also put a link for. And then I think like another part of this too is as far as like medical safety, like it might be good to like look up the hospitals that are along the route and like just be aware of where those are. And, again, it's kind of the airplane thing again, where you're like, am I okay with being kind of isolated, right? Like if we're in the middle of nowhere between cities, like, are we okay with being that far from a hospital for those hours that you're between them? And I think a lot of times it probably will be okay, but maybe to have extra supplies that might be needed in an emergency will be good. Okay, and then here's like this one advice too. If you have a child that like unbuckles while you're driving, there's a seatbelt buckle guard to stop them from doing that. So I don't know if like that's like a super common issue among kids, but if you do, then we also have a link for that if you want to check that out. Okay. Now we are on to the section about hotels/lodging. And I think the main thing that we got with this were people that were concerned about food and like prepping for kids that are G-tube fed, or they do purees for their G-tubes, or they eat those by mouth or whatever. So we have some advice on this. One mom said, we need help on this. This is the main reason we don't travel. So this is for you and everyone who feels like that. So I think like the main thing that we heard is like people want access to like kitchens. And so that can come a few different ways. Some parents sounded like they were fine with the hotel like mini like fridge, and then you might bring their blender and plug that in. But a lot of parents said they wanted like a full kitchen. And so one way to do that is a long stay hotel, because those typically come with like a full kitchen. And then she said that not only is that like helpful for food prep, but she said that because of her daughter's disabilities, it's not really feasible to feed her while sitting on a bed or a couch or something. And so having the kitchen area makes that much safer and easier. So that sounds right. And then this person who likes the long stay hotels, she said she likes those better than places like Airbnb or VRBO, because many times Airbnbs have restrictions on kids and they can often be pretty inaccessible. So that's been really great for them.
We've had a lot of success with our family with Airbnbs in VRBO or Verbo, but we always have to do a lot of research on where they're located and like what their restrictions are. And then also a lot of times like we'll call ahead of time, like how many steps do you have and like where's your kitchen and what does your kitchen have in it. So those are options, but I would agree that there's more prep work that you're going to have to do if you're going to stay in an Airbnb or VRBO, just because the information that they give you on the website isn't always complete and also isn't always accurate. So you are going to want to check that before you go do anything like this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think it definitely is doable, because a lot of parents did say they love doing Airbnbs or VRBOs for that. Mm-hmm. So it probably depends on like your access needs and then making sure those are met by calling ahead or doing the research. But I also like, while doing some research for like accessible locations that you can have for where you're going to stay, there's a website called becomingrentable.com, and it has, they put, and quote, accessible short-term vacation rentals, and that's in the US. So I think that's really cool too. So that website might also just streamline if you're looking for somewhere that's specifically accessible, and it has like several different disabilities like mobility aids, or it can also just be things like being deaf or like just different things like that. So I thought that was really cool. So we'll have a link for that also. So I have this recording from one listener about her need for a kitchen.
So we love finding hotels that allow us to have a kitchen. Tons of them have suites that allow you to have like a kitchen. Usually it's like a 1-bedroom suite, or you can get them that just have like a kitchen option within like the standard room. We use those everywhere we travel because they're super helpful for us to be able to make our meals. Because of our child's diagnosis, he has to have like specifically made meals. So we try to do that, or we try to rent a house on like Airbnb or VRBO.
So yeah, that's kind of just like more of what other parents were saying, but just like the need for that. And so that is true. We've gotten a suite before when we went to like Disneyland, and we were with my mom. So she had her own room and we had our own room, but it did have a full kitchen in it. And so you can also find those. I'm not sure if those counted as a long stay hotel. But anyway, so I think doing your research, I think, can really help with that, because a lot of us do need kitchens.
That's another thing too. Some hotels, they won't be called long stay, but they'll be called suites. And some hotels with suites have kitchens and some of them don't. So again, the general rule of thumb is like, if you're not sure, just call ahead of time and they can tell you like right at the front desk if that's a thing that is available.
Another thing with that too, this isn't like super related to like the food thing, but a lot of hotels have accessible rooms. In fact, maybe everyone does. I feel like I see that like every single one. It's like, oh, like you can, the one's listed as accessible. And so like the shower's accessible, or, you're able to get there.
They're on the first floor most of the time too, which is almost all hotels will have elevators and that sort of thing, but sometimes they're broken or sometimes they're really busy. And it can be really helpful just to stay on the first floor, and then you don't have to go up and down all the time.
Yeah. So pick those if you're doing a hotel. Look into that. And like tons of parents talked about bringing blenders with them to do their kids' purees, which I think definitely makes sense. And some parents said they have like a small single serve blender that they use. And this parent said, she said, we brought our small blender and made purees out of foods we got at restaurants. I'm like, yeah, like why not? That's pretty cool. And this other parent said that she buys baby food while they're there, so they don't have to like bring it. And then she adds butter or ghee or yogurt for the extra calories. So that's another option. And then one thing that I was thinking too is just the like different pre-made blended formulas, like functional formularies could be a really great use there. Even if you typically make your own purees and your own blends, like I think using a product like that that's just ready to go, meant for that kind of thing, could be really helpful. So you don't have to worry about it like while you're there, as long as you're able to like haul all that with you. Because like You kind of run into the issue of like you're flying, and then that's going to add a lot of weight and space and things like that. So, and then another parent said that she freezes pre-made food and takes it in a cooler. There's also these squeeze pouches for purees. This mom said, I have an Infantino pouch station and make all of my son's food ahead of time and freeze it and pack it in a cooler. So that's awesome too. So we'll also have a link for that product as well. Also, one thing to keep in mind, I think, is like the location of where you're staying. Someone said, always choose a hotel. I'll say hotel or, Airbnb, whatever you choose, close to a hospital that you have confidence could meet your child's needs in case of emergency, big or little. And I think that also might determine your destination, right? Like where you're vacationing, because I imagine that like where you are in the city isn't necessarily going to make a huge difference. I mean, if you want to be like a 1-minute drive instead of a 10-minute drive, that might make you feel safer. But like, I imagine that this really kind of goes to like planning your vacation of like where you're going. So maybe you're going somewhere less rural.
You might not choose like one of those big Western national parks that are like 8 hours from everything, especially if your child is not super stable, but you still want to go somewhere, maybe pick a more urban area to do a vacation while you're still in that phase of life.
Yeah. And even one thing that we did, like my mom lives in a small town in Idaho. Definitely like no big hospitals over there. I mean, it was like a 4-hour drive from the main hospital we'd go to, but I was like, hey, could they life flight him from this hospital? Do they have life flight? Okay, yes, they can. So they could life flight him over to Primary Children's. Like, okay, so I feel more safe. And we even talked to his doctors too. Like, do you think that it's safe to bring him that far away? And they're like, if you can life flight him, like, yeah, it's probably fine. I think just keeping all those things in mind can help you have peace of mind while you're there, and you can enjoy it more in case something does happen. And then lastly, in this section, we have beds, because not all of our kids sleep in like the typical, like, hey, I'm just going to throw my kid in like this twin bed. With Kimball, it's really awesome because he's so little, because he has dwarfism. So he still is in a pack and play. Isn't that fun? He's like going to be 5 soon. I just love that, because that's something that if we go to a family's house, like, oh, do you have a pack and play? Great, we're good to go. And that's that. And anyway. So yay for dwarfism. And then there's also like safe place travel bed is what it's called. And that looks really cool. It's like a tented in bed. I mean, it's made for families like ours. So you can see how that's like, there's no way for them to fall out or anything. It's like a completely enclosed, kind of like a crib tent. And then another parent said that she places pillows under the sheets to create a little bumper. Another one said that they have blow up bed rails that go under the sheets, also as a bumper. This can help like with bed access needs. One parent also, like just in general, I think this is really great. She said to call ahead and ask what kind of accessible things they offer. I think that's really great, because there might be things that you don't think to even ask and they might have on hand, or, just different accommodations they have. Okay, we're going to move on to theme parks. And elephant in the room is that like this is mostly like people go to Disney. That's like the main theme park. But we're naming it theme parks because some of these things are not specific to Disney theme parks. But I know that's a very popular destination. And so we're going to start actually with some like Disney specific tips. And then we'll move on to a few general tips for theme parks. And we have this really great advice from Carrie about that.
I just wanted to share that the reason we flew out to Florida was actually flying out to Disney World. Shocker. And before going out there, we actually prepped a little bit, and it really paid off in big ways. So we made a sign for Sloan that basically said, it was just in giant bold lettering, and we put it on the front of her stroller and then on the side of her stroller. So it was very clear to cast members and characters when we walked up to them. And the sign said, "Hi, I'm Sloan. I'm deaf-blind." And then it said something along the lines of, it was very simple, but it said, "I love vibes. Please get close to me and give me a firm pat," which is, pat on the arm or something like that, which is what Sloan loves. And it ended up being a really awesome thing to have while we were there, because characters, as we would walk up, you could see the characters see the sign and then take it in and immediately bend down and interact with Sloan through touch. They would process in their magical Disney way how to engage with Sloan best, through touch, through tapping, vibrations, just really cool experiences. And along with that, we would try to incorporate some of Sloan's favorite things into character experiences as much as possible. And so the last day we were there at Animal Kingdom, she actually has a little vibrating bug. And we took it in to see Safari Mickey. And we talked about how her vibrating bug, she had found it at Animal Kingdom and made a whole story around it. And Safari Mickey played with her vibrating bug with Sloan, and she just loved that. And it created such a magical, fun experience. And really just integrating like your child's favorite toys with characters and just their needs as much as possible creates a great experience.
Yeah, don't you love that? So those of you who are watching the YouTube video can see pictures of Sloan with her sign. It's super cute. But I love how like bold Carrie was with that, because I think a lot of times we feel, I mean, a little bit of an extension of how I think a lot of disabled people have said that they feel, but like afraid to take up space and to ask for things like that. But I think that's like so cool that she did that and like used that as like a way to help Sloan experience a theme park, but like in her own way, since it'd look really, really different than like the typical non-disabled child. And then another piece of advice is an audio form from another parent.
So I've got 3 tips for theme parks, but specifically like Disney theme parks. So if you haven't, most theme parks have something called a DAS pass or an equivalent, which is a disability pass, which allows you to wait outside of the actual ride queues. And then you go in through like a quicker lane, like a lightning lane or a fast pass lane or whatever, to be able to get onto the ride much faster and easier. It's a great tool for those in our community. Another tip would be that you are allowed to bring food into a lot of theme parks. And if you have a disabled child, you can 100% bring food in with you to any theme park because the ADA allows us to. Most theme parks also let you bring the Wonderfold wagon, and Disney will let you bring your Wonderfold. They cannot tell you you can't have it. It is an ADA mobility device.
Okay, so that's awesome too. So I think those are kind of goes back to like similar to like the airplane tips, but just basically like there are other families with disabilities like traveling and doing these things. And so like there are things in place like the DAS pass and, you know, bringing the wagon and things like that. This one parent said, Disneyland is the only place we've vacationed for 7 years now because they have allergy-free foods. They also let my now teenager relax in the mother-baby areas, and they have ASL interpreters and the DAS pass. And so I asked her more about the mother-baby area. I think that's cool because I've heard, I haven't actually been in there, but I've heard from like my sisters who've used it that it's like super calming and like air conditioned and like peaceful music and low lighting. I think it's typically for breastfeeding your baby or feeding them or just taking care of them or whatever. And so I was like, that would be really great for overstimulated kids, like especially if they have disabilities that are adding to that. And she said that they just always go to those mother-baby areas and say, we just need a quiet spot for a few minutes or something like that. And they are always super helpful. And she said they also have the coldest water in the park. So it's a good place to fill up and cool down and stuff. So I think that, like, again, if you ask for it, like a lot of times they will accommodate what needs you have.
Yeah, it's like you can't over explain. Like if you need something, as long as you, I shouldn't say always, but like oftentimes if you ask for it and then are like very clear as to why you need it, people will usually let you access those kind of services.
And then something also like along the lines of overstimulation is that a lot of parents said they like using noise canceling headphones, which can also help with that. And then there's also just like for tips for just like in general, so not necessarily for Disney parks, but like theme parks or even like zoos and things like that. I mean, I also got like a lot of general tips that I think work for a lot of families, but like manage your expectations, think about the weather, build in breaks. One parent said to always know where the first aid area is. I think that's really smart. Okay, here's like this really awesome advice. She said, if your child is mobile and known to elope, take a picture walking into the park so you can show security exactly what they look like if they get lost. So like, that's really smart. And then diaper changes can also happen. Like if you have a larger child that needs diaper changes, they said using first aid stations can work because they usually have like a cot or stretcher that they let you use to change your child's diaper. So that's cool. And then our last section is about camping. I think this is one that definitely like feels like the least doable. Like you're just like, well, how would that ever work? we have medical devices that need electricity. Like even this mom said, she was like, we feel sad because it's impossible to camp. We need electricity for medical equipment, which I think a lot of families feel. But we also have all these ideas from parents who have made it work that have children with needs of like electricity for their devices. So this one mom said that she said, 5 years ago, I told my husband that we couldn't go camping because it was too complicated with his feeding pump and all the devices. And then now, 5 years later, we are hauling feeding tube supplies for 2 different kids, meds, oxygen tanks, a pulse oximeter, a nebulizer. It didn't get less complicated. We just adapted. So I think that's cool. And then she just has like actual practical advice for making this work. So we'll listen to that.
So my biggest suggestion with camping is to just start small. The first time my husband took my oldest son camping, he went just the 2 of them. We didn't take any of the other kids. We didn't make it a big deal. It was just, can we do this overnight? Can we take a child that has a G tube and is also autistic, has a lot of sensory sensitivities camping, or is he going to get overwhelmed by the change in routine, the change in scenery? And after we got past that first step, we could gradually make more and more changes. So we went from 1 night to 2 nights with everyone. The first time we went camping as a family, we only drove 40 minutes away. It was close enough that if something happened, we could drive home. We could drive back to the hospital if we needed to. And these are things that make camping so convenient for a family that has a kid with medically complex needs. Because, for example, with Nathaniel, my 5th, the big problem for us with traveling is that he requires oxygen on the plane. Our insurance doesn't cover portable oxygen tanks, so we have to pay out of pocket. It's not cheap. So for him to go camping, we could take our oxygen tanks with us. We have a portable power bank. I strongly recommend everyone owning one of these if you have machines you're reliant on, just in case of emergency in general. But that's how we connected the pulse ox overnight, because he's on pulse ox when he's sleeping, because he's on oxygen at night. And we would charge it in the car during the day, so it was ready to go the next day. And going from 40 minutes away, 1 night, 2 nights, we're able to kind of graduate to 4 nights, 3 hours away, which is really awesome. And something that we just didn't think we would be able to do, and honestly couldn't do on a different kind of vacation.
Yeah, so I feel like some of those principles definitely relate to travel in general, like starting small, starting close by, and kind of like upping it to what you want after that.
You can do a lot of research about particular campgrounds ahead of time because, one, not all campsites are created equal on like every level, from like bathrooms to accessibility to everything else. But we are taking Gemma camping for the first time this summer to a place where Sam and I went for our 10-year anniversary last year. And they have accessible campsites where they have like a paved path all the way up right to like where your campsite is going to be. They also have electrical hookups for some of them, which again, depending on like the power needs you have, I understand like that still may not work for everyone, but you can have some amount of electricity at certain campsites. And then there's also, we're doing tent camping, but I do know that some people get camper accessible campsites and do it that way. And that can be a little bit easier for people to handle too.
I think you're right. There are other parents that talked about doing RV camping, and that can make it easier. And then she did mention like the portable energy bank for machinery. And so like they're like a power brick, right? Like you charge that, and then you're able to just like plug things in and it gives you power. We've done that before, even just for like charging our phones too while camping. And so that can be nice. But yeah, you can plug equipment into that. And so that can be kind of a game changer too, to make that work if you really want to make that work. And then another parent was saying, don't forget to bring extension cords. So I think that can also help you get around further than you might otherwise. And then this last tip this mom has, it's called a sand-proof beach walled blanket holder. So I was like, hey, what is this? I gotta describe this. She said it's supposed to keep the sand off your beach towels, but we use it for the beach, outdoor family gatherings, etc. Our son can crawl but can't walk, so we keep him safely contained in this. It keeps his toys and iPad clean, and he can't eat grass or sand. It rolls up into a small bag like a tent. And so there's an awesome picture of that too on the video, but that seemed like a really great thing to have as well for kids who don't want to just like sit in a chair the whole time. They can roll around in that or sit in that or whatever. So I wanted to wrap up with one last recording from Carrie, kind of like a general thing about traveling, because I feel like she sums it up really well.
But I just wanted to share one big thing that I've learned through traveling with Sloan, which is as a solo mom, traveling with a child with medical needs and disabilities, for me, finding sort of like a mindful space for patience and like consciously adapting as we travel has been one of the biggest factors that lead to success for me when we go. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it happens all the time. Of course, we all have our moments where we break down, where we need a moment to breathe, whatever it is. But as much as I can, just stopping and saying, okay, say you're going to Disney World or you're going to a national park. It's not about the rush. It's not about doing the next thing. It's truly about enjoying the moment you're in, because so many of us maybe never thought we'd have these moments. And so I've really tried to consciously focus on when I'm traveling with Sloan, it's okay if we need to stop for an extra need. We might need to stop for a trach change. We might need to stop for, some food, which for Sloan looks different than most toddlers. We can't just eat in the car and go. And that's okay, because that's a part of adapting. That's a part of our life. And we're in no hurry. We've accommodated for that on our trip. And what's most important is that we all enjoy it and we all make memories together and we get those moments that we thought we'd never have. And so I just wanted to share, for me, the biggest success factor for us is always just trying to keep that patience and adapting wherever we can.
Absolutely.
Don't you love that? I think that's such a good point of like, we were not guaranteed these moments. And so I think that bleeds over into a lot of areas of our lives. But like, if you didn't think that your child would live and you're able to go on a trip with them, that can be, I think, a deeply emotional experience too, of like, oh my gosh, here I am visiting my grandmother, or here I am, flying away on this trip that I never thought I'd be able to have with my child. I think can be really cathartic and like empowering and just really awesome.
And I love her note too about slowing down and just like taking in the moments as they are. That's one thing I've noticed with Gemma is she just likes to be in new places and like have new experiences. And sometimes that's just seeing different scenery, like stuff that's like, oh, that's like not as interesting of an activity, right? Is like stuff that she really enjoys. Like she actually also really enjoys road trips for whatever reason. She's really sensory and she likes the movement of the car. And so accepting that some of your trips might look a little bit different and they might have to be paced a little different, but you can still a lot of times do them with your particular family's needs in mind.
Yeah. So I hope that everyone listening, like obviously if you're listening to this episode, it's because you have some level of desire to travel, or you already do travel and you wanted more tips. But I really hope that this episode empowered you to feel like maybe you can take baby steps towards that dream, or make it happen. Or if you're like, heck with that, I don't want to do any of this, like, power to you also. And I'm really grateful to everyone who contributed and gave us so many great pieces of advice. And thank you, Alyssa, for joining me. So check out the show notes for links to like all these products that we mentioned, and the YouTube video if you want to see pictures of each product as we talk about it, and to the article that we have on our website that kind of lists out some of our top tips so that you don't have to jot down all the things that we talked about. Join me next week for a conversation with two parents as we discuss when we should scale back on therapies for our children and how we can do that. See you then.